Hi, I'm Dr. Barry Vaughn, and I'd like to suggest that every student needs to take philosophy. But I know what you're thinking. What's the point? After all, everybody knows philosophy is useless.
Scott, things aren't as happy as they used to be down here at the unemployment office. Joblessness is no longer just for philosophy majors.
But Kent Brockman couldn't be more wrong, and I'd like to show you why. Few people know it, but philosophy is the foundation of how we think, or at least how we should think about the world. So far as we know, philosophy as a way of thinking about the world is purely a human activity, and it's a relatively new way of thinking about the world. If we put it in context, human beings like us, that is, modern Homo sapiens, seem to have arrived on the scene about 200,000 years ago, and for most of our species' history, we lived hand to mouth, hunting and gathering what we needed for survival. But then, about 8,000 BCE, there was a fundamental shift in our existence. We call it the agricultural revolution. The domestication of food allowed our ancestors to begin living in geographically permanent communities, no longer forced to forage for the means of survival. The subsequent population explosion that followed would cause a wholesale change in human social evolution, with diversification of labor, symbolic systems of writing and counting, and the development of social stratification. Anthropologists call it civilization. But even though the way we lived in the world had radically changed, there's very little evidence that the way we thought about the world had changed. To explain why the world was the way it was, why we're here and where we were going, our ancestors uniformly appealed to narrative, or mythos, as the Greeks call it, myth, as we pronounce it today. And there's really no reason to think that that way of viewing the world would have ever changed had it not been for another revolution, a revolution in the way we think about the world. At the end of the 7th century BCE, the philosophical revolution introduced an alternative way of accounting for the world. It introduced reason, or logos. That new paradigm of thought, the rational worldview, would take hold amongst the late Iron Age Greeks and would forever change our understanding of the world around us. Instead of appealing to the authority of ancestral tradition and the narratives handed down from one generation to another, philosophy demanded an explanation rooted in our own observations, guided by an objective rational process. Logic, in other words. The world we live in today, for good or ill, is the child of the philosophical revolution. So that naturally leads us to ask, what is philosophy? Now today, when we think of philosophy, we understand it to be an academic discipline, part of the academy, that social institution which is dedicated to the discovery, preservation, and transmission of knowledge. And within the academy, philosophy holds a unique position, which will become more clear in just a moment. But just thinking about academic philosophy, we should understand that it's really an umbrella discipline containing a number of unique but methodologically related areas of research. We usually identify 5 main subdisciplines of academic philosophy, not unlike the subdisciplines that fall under academic science. Epistemology is the branch of academic philosophy that investigates the nature of knowledge and various problems associated with its acquisition. Metaphysics is the subdiscipline that focuses on the investigation of reality and the nature of existence. Axiology researches the nature of value judgments about the world, whether it's morality, aesthetics, or questions of justice and political organization and economic distribution. Logic is the branch of academic philosophy that is dedicated to the investigation into the nature and function of reason. It's also the methodology by which philosophers conduct their investigations into the other subdisciplines. And finally, there's the history of philosophy, which is the rational investigation into the historical development of the method and theories making up the other four branches of what we call philosophy. So far from being a single-focused discipline like psychology or zoology, philosophy is wide-ranging and inclusive of many distinct areas of human interest. But philosophy is also the foundation of almost all the other fields that we think of making up the modern academy, from the arts and humanities to the natural and social sciences. Philosophy is the trunk of the academic tree, and from the rational worldview that it discovered more than 2,000 years ago, all the various areas of human investigation have grown, and from them even more diversification and specialization has emerged. This is why the highest level of academic certification in the modern academy is the PhD, the Doctorate of Philosophy. All the other various academic fields and subfields that we know today grew out of philosophy and its unique rational worldview, which made the knowledge that we today take for granted possible. But beyond an interest in the historical development of human thought, what reason can we offer for continuing the study of philosophy? And beyond those with an interest in this historical development, why should anyone study philosophy today? Well, not only does philosophy help students to understand their own field of study more deeply, it also provides basic skills that are practically useful in all academic disciplines. The most obvious is learning how to actually think. But there's another case to be made as well, although it may seem counterintuitive. The academic field of philosophy is actually one of the most practical of all undergraduate majors. The complexity of the world today often requires education that goes beyond the basic bachelor's degree. Economic security and professional advancement and satisfaction depends more than ever on postgraduate education. And here we find that the humble bachelor's degree in philosophy is actually one of the most practical degrees, compared to others, that one could take. For those who desire postgraduate education in one of the hundreds of academic fields in the academy, taking and competitively scoring on the Graduate Records exam is essential. The GRE is composed of three distinct areas: the verbal, the quantitative, and analytical writing sections. And thanks to years of records, we can look at the data to see how various undergraduate majors typically prepare their graduates for this essential entrance examination. What the data demonstrates is that, in general, philosophy is one of the best undergraduate degrees for preparing to move into advanced graduate studies. And what many people don't realize is you don't have to do graduate work in the field you majored in as an undergraduate. So thinking of the Bachelor of Arts or the Bachelor of Science as a preparation degree for graduate studies in any academic field makes it clear that philosophy is an extremely practical degree choice. But perhaps you're thinking about a professional degree instead of an academic one. If you're thinking about law, for instance, you'll need to take and competitively score on the law school admissions test, the LSAT. Now, lots of people plan to go to law school, and once again, we have lots of data we can look at to help guide our decision of degree choice. These are the top 10 most popular pre-law degrees in U.S. higher education today. But when we look at the average LSAT scores by major, it becomes clear that popularity does not translate into success. We find something very similar when we look to professional schools and business, which require the Graduate Management's Admissions Test. As with the LSAT, data from years of past GMAT scores demonstrates that among the many undergraduate majors one might take to secure a place in business school, philosophy, however counterintuitive it may seem, should be a top choice for undergraduates. But perhaps postgraduate education, whether it's academic or professional, is not an option for you. What if the choice of undergraduate degrees were predicated solely on the highest return on investment? Well, thankfully, we have lots of data that will help guide our decision. let's take a look at the most popular undergraduate degrees in American higher education today. You'll note philosophy doesn't even make the list. That shouldn't really be surprising, as there are over 830 recognized and accredited undergraduate degrees in American education. Now, thinking about this, which of these do you think would be more or less lucrative? Fortunately, we don't have to guess. Year in and year out, business management is among the most popular majors in American higher ed. But when we look at returns on investment, something they should really be keenly interested in, we find that though it's popular, it only ranks fourth on this list of most lucrative. And not only is it fourth on this list, note that it ranks 410 out of 835 possible undergraduate majors. It's in the middle of the earnings ranks. Engineering is almost the exact opposite in terms of both its popularity and its economic return on investment. Now suppose we asked where a bachelor's degree in philosophy ranks on this list. Where do you suppose it would be? Perhaps with psychology or maybe sociology. That's where my students usually rank it. When we look at the data, what we discover is that a bachelor's in philosophy ranks higher than either, and even higher than the most popular degree in the US. To be sure, it's not at the top of the list, but this data shows just how wrong our intuitions about the practicality of philosophy as an undergraduate major actually are. But maybe you're thinking, well, that's true, but you still have to go to graduate school after getting the BA. No, we're talking about your earning power with only a bachelor's level degree, as this graph makes clear. Now, certainly, these people aren't professional philosophers. That does require postgraduate education. These are people who have entered the workforce in many varied fields with only a bachelor's degree in philosophy. And the data makes clear that people with only a bachelor's degree in philosophy, on average, do quite well. That can only be due to the skills they develop while studying philosophy. And that's the point. That skill set, learning how to think, learning how to solve problems, learning how to approach problems from a critical perspective and then communicate solutions clearly, translates into a return on your investment. That's why opinion makers are talking about the benefits of studying philosophy. Scanning the headlines of those who are thinking about what our society needs and what our economy needs and what skill sets our graduates should have demonstrates that philosophy is one of the most practical undergraduate degrees one could possibly get. So here's what we've discovered. Philosophy is practical. It's the foundation of other academic disciplines, which is why it's such a good foundational degree for academic and professional postgraduate work. Unlike other disciplines that claim to teach critical thinking, and some do, philosophy does so explicitly. Philosophical inquiry is logical inquiry. If you want to learn how to think logically, philosophy is the place to start. And despite what the vast majority of people think, philosophy is relatively lucrative compared to the majority of undergraduate degrees. So if all of this is true, what follows? What follows is every college student should take at least one course in philosophy, and more is better. So what are the introductory courses and who benefits most from them? Usually called Philosophy 101, though numbering systems in higher education vary across the American system, the Introduction to Western Philosophy course is useful for all college majors. Most liberal arts universities require it of all undergraduates, and perhaps it should be mandated universally. If for no other reason, this course helps students to understand the intellectual world they live in. It introduces them to some of the core questions that have, over time, given rise to various other academic disciplines that make up the academy today and that they themselves will go on to specialize in. It also introduces students to the basics of critical thinking by examining philosophers in the context of doing philosophy, that is, exercising logical thinking. But if a more focused approach to rational thinking is desired, there's another choice. An introduction to logic could be an essential class for you. In this class, a student learns about the development of what you and I take for granted today as rational thinking. It introduces students to the disciplines of inductive and deductive reasoning, which apply to all other academic fields. But it also provides a more focused foundation of critical reasoning, which lays the foundation for many technical and professional fields. Finally, you might consider an introduction to ethics. Almost everyone claims to be concerned with thinking morally about the world, and some people actually are. An introduction to ethics teaches students how to actually think morally, and the applications are obvious. I'll leave you with one last thought, an observation of one of the most well-known philosophers of the entire Western tradition. At his trial in 399 BCE, Socrates explained his own philosophical journey to his fellow citizens, exhorting them to seek knowledge or wisdom before they sought wealth, or family, or honor, or power, because without wisdom, how would one use those fortunes? The answer is foolishly. So no matter what stage of life you're in, and especially if you're a college student, consider taking a philosophy course.